here sitting by your side. Open up your heart and let me in. I promise not to break you. I promise I'll be all that you want. So let me in my heart before. Let me in. Oh, your love explodes. Our hearts implodes. Your love explodes. Our hearts implode.
Whenever a family has a child with an illness, you never know where that journey's going to take you. And we always prayed for a miracle.
She was the flyer. She's the one that they would, get and throw into the air.
She was this cute, petite, tiny little girl with just a head full of long blonde hair. She wasn't afraid of heights. In fact, she wasn't really afraid of anything.
I've got a story just like anyone else. A wise man said, this too shall pass. Oh yeah. Come on, I'm gonna go all the way this time. I'm flying, never coming down. Gonna reach the stars. I'm going high.
We had noticed she had just gotten weak. I said, what's the matter with you? I said, you're a tumbler. You can tumble and do backflips, without knowing. And it progressed from that to she fainted a couple of times. And we thought it was, she's got a virus or whatever. So I took her into the doctor the next day, and they immediately sent us to Texas Children's Hospital.
She was just, from the moment I met her, she was about 11 years old, she just had a sort of magical presence about her, and nothing would keep that girl down.
Victoria was diagnosed at the age of 11 and a half with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The cure rate for leukemia is the 80%. When Victoria was told that she had cancer, that's the only time we saw her cry. And Dr. Dreyer walked in and told her that 80%, 85% rate cure. So Victoria accepted that. She said she wasn't worried anymore.
In today's world, we cure, go away forever, about 80% of children. In 1965, we cured 5% of children. So the improvement is unbelievable. And Victoria actually had a particular subtype of ALL that the cure rate should have even been better than that.
Victoria's treatment was to take 2.5 years. And at the end of 2.5 years of chemo, Victoria was to be finished with her treatment.
So during that time, she had some good days, she had some bad days.
When she was sick, she still would put on her cheerleading suit and go do cheerleading. I have lots of pictures and important memories in my office, and one of the ones that I get to see every day is my beautiful picture of Victoria as an angel at our Camp Periwinkle. I'm the camp doctor. I've been the camp doctor for 20 plus years. And I took a little girl who was suffering from cystic fibrosis and cancer. And she was in Tori's cabin. But Victoria would come around, 11:30 in the morning, 12, get this little girl all ready for the day's activities for the afternoon. And she got this little girl ready to go to the dance. I will never forget that little girl at that dance. What a wonderful support Tori was, because without Tori, this little girl would never have had the camp experience that she did.
She feels great. How does my heart sound?
It's a little off. It kind of sounds like a bunny.
Oh.
I like bunnies.
Oh, you like bunnies?
I love them. Okay, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Frickback and see what she has to say.
Well, what's your name again?
My name is Bunny McBunkbunk.
Well, Bunny McBunkbunk, today our breaking story is about a little dog named Arfie. Let's ask Arfie.
In 2005, Texas children held their first radiothon with the Children's Miracle Network Hospital, and that's where we met Doc.
We were doing a radiothon at a radio station in Houston, Texas, and she was the kind of kid that you could hear her coming long before she got to your soundproof studios. She was very full of energy. She was just 10 or 11 years old and was already considered a long-term survivor of leukemia.
Here she is, lying up in bed, tubes connected to her, She didn't go and cry about it or bemoan her situation. She was around to try to visit these other kids to make them feel better. And I think that's really the legacy of her.
At the end of 2.5 years, when Victoria's treatment was over, they performed another spinal tap and a bone marrow test. The Dr. Dreyer called us. I remember it was a Thursday, and she said, "I cannot believe this, but Victoria has relapsed." Because of the seriousness of her relapse, they told Victoria that her next option was to receive a bone marrow transplant.
Our community really rallied behind our family and our church. You know, we even had signs, "Pray for Victoria." So it wasn't just our family, it affected everybody.
And she made it through, and 9 months later, she relapsed again.
Joellen called me, and she had just the worst news ever, and that is that Victoria's cancer had returned.
So this was 3 times she was told that she had cancer. And so we began another journey to receive a second bone marrow transplant.
Victoria at that time decided she was going to fight and entered the hospital for what would turn out to be an extremely long stay, many, many, many months. And so as a result of this extended stay, I saw that there wasn't as much for her to do as you can stay placated with as a young person.
And he asked her at that time, he said, "Victoria, do you like to play video games?" She said, "I love to play video games."
So I put the word out to a website that I worked with called Sarcastic Gamer, and the online community responded in droves. What I expected to be a couple of games that might come from here and there instead turned out to be things coming from all over the world.
And we started receiving boxes of games.
We had games that came in from Asia and Europe, and
He was receiving games from all over Texas, all over the United States.
so much so that it became sort of overwhelming. Tori had to end up giving it away to other kids who were also stuck in the hospital.
She was the one to go around to be that extra person for all these other children.
It just doesn't seem right that a child should be sick. It's not right that a child stay in a hospital and that they're confined to the hospital and their 4 walls and they're not experiencing the other things that children are doing.
She couldn't be around other people that could have any infections. You know, when she was out, she had to wear her masks.
During this time, Victoria contracted a fungal infection, which is from a very low immune system, and she had little to no immune system left.
And I asked her what she wanted for Christmas, and she said, "I'd really just like to get out of this hospital and go see Christmas lights. Christmas lights are something my family and I go see together all the time, and I can't even leave to go see Christmas lights."
We knew that during the final stages that we weren't going to have Victoria with us much longer.
We were only outside for about 10 minutes, but it was a very special 10 minutes. It wasn't a lot of talking. We just looked at lights. And after about 10 minutes, we rolled back upstairs to her room, and we had our picture made in front of a little Christmas tree. And I said goodbye. And that picture is one of my most prized possessions because it was taken just moments before I saw my friend for the last time. And Victoria passed away before I could get back to see her.
The miracle that we received was that we had her for the time that we had her.
I brought her picture, and I just put that on the table. And I said, you know, this is what we look at every day during this radiothon, during this campaign.
Victoria passed away on January 21st, 2008, after a 4-year battle with leukemia, failed bone marrow transplants, and fungal infections.
It was as a result of Tori's death, sitting at her funeral, that I made up my mind that I needed to be doing this, not just a couple days a year with a radiothon, that I needed to be doing this with my life.
Doc wanted to do something special for Victoria, in memory of Victoria, and he came up with a fundraiser called Extra Life. And this fundraiser would be for the gaming community.
It just occurred to me that gamers should be able to do the things they love to help sick and injured kids as well. And so Extra Life was born. 1,200 gamers showed up on October 15th in 2008.
With this year's Extra Life Gaming Marathon, we're helping save kids' lives. You don't even have to be a crime-fighting superhero.
Each and every year afterwards, it continued to grow. Gamers responded by being able to game for their local hospitals. The next year, 4,500 gamers showed up, raised almost $500,000. The year after that, it was 15,000 gamers raising $1 million, and the next year, 17,000 gamers raising $2.1 million. Video games are like the #1 form of entertainment on planet Earth, have been now for quite a while.
Anyone could be involved in Extra Life.
Gamers aren't that pale kid in mom and dad's basement. They're mom and dads, they're aunts and uncles.
A young child to an older adult to a grandparent.
You can take all that fun of playing games for 24 hours and reach out to your friends and bring them to your environment.
Or if you want to play a board game, a card game.
The funds that Extra Lifers raise can go to a variety of purposes in the local area at the local hospital.
So maybe your extra $20 or your extra $50 goes to curing 87% of children with leukemia.
They might buy an isolette for a baby that is born the size of a cell phone and has to fight for its life.
I can guarantee you that that money goes directly back to these children to keep this from happening again to someone else's child.
Getting involved with Extra Life is really simple. You just have to go to the website at extra-life.org, put in a few details in there, join a team if you'd like to, or create one. After that, it's as simple as fundraising with your friends and family. Let them know why you are doing this. They should know that the money you raise is going to stay local in your community.
We never will truly lose Victoria because she will live for all of us through this.
It started with a little girl in Orange, Texas.
And I think that's all we have to say for today.
All we have to say today, so
we'll see
See
you
you
tomorrow
later
at
on
news at
whatever time it is.
at Victoria's house. Bye.
Hello and welcome to Founders and Legends 4. I am your host, Luke Gygax. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited to be here. I'm joined by my good friend, Pat Kilbane, who we'll be talking to here in a moment. But before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about what Founders and Legends is, and some of our sponsors made it possible. Founders and Legends is something that I created 4 years ago in order to help all the new gamers who are coming into our community understand a little bit about the origins and history of Dungeons and Dragons. Because gosh, I think we've gone from about 6 million Dungeons and Dragons players to over 20 million, and some projections I've heard are as high as 60 million. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, and that's global, but that's a lot of people that have all come in since the advent of 5th edition, which is really wonderful. It's so great to see our community so vibrant, but I think it's good for all of us to know a little bit about our history. So many of the gamers today have no idea the names Gygax or Arneson, let alone some of the other important people who helped build the foundation of this wonderful hobby that has impacted our culture so much. So that's why we're here. We're going to be talking about the history of Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to be having some cool panels with some of the people who were there in the early days. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about campaign design and the healing effects of RPGs. But today and this morning, we're going to talk about the origins of the game. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Besides to educate people and to have some amazing Dungeons and Dragons, some epic adventures. We are also here to raise money for a very important charity, one that's near and dear to my heart, that I've been assisting with for several years, Extra Life, and specifically the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. So today and tomorrow we'll be playing games to raise money for that charity, and we'll be showing some spots about where the money goes that you donate, both to Children's Hospital and what Extra Life is about. So please look for those links in chat. Look for those. Look for the information when we put it up, and please donate. You can join our team and help us raise money by gaming this weekend if you'd like, or just hitting the donate button. It's at www.extra-life.org/team/FNL4, and that's for Founders and Legends 4. And of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsors. Thank you so much to Level Up Dice, premier dice maker. They are our title sponsor for this whole weekend. So it's due to their generosity and that of our Powered By sponsor, Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms, that we're able to bring this great content to you over this weekend and help out Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. I'd also like to thank Hero Forge for once again generously donating lots and lots of cool codes and gifts. So when you're watching the games, make sure that you're paying attention in chat. You can win some cool coupons for Hero Forge. We have Northwind Adventures. My friend Jeff Talanian has his Hyperborea 3E Kickstarter going on right now, as well as my friends at Steamforged Games, the makers of Animal Adventures, which my kids love, and Epic Encounters, which is one of the coolest box sets that I think you can buy. And in fact, I even have one, over the other shoulder, right there on my bookshelf. I have a whole bunch of those. So thank you to our very generous sponsors, and thank you to all of you for being here and for donating to Extra Life. But like I said, I'm joined by my friend Pat Kilbane. He's a comedian, but today we're here to talk to him wearing his other hat, which is not is that a Cubs hat?
It's a Reds hat.
A Reds. I was gonna say that doesn't look right. I was hoping it was a Cubs hat because being from my dad being from Chicago, I like Chicago sports. Obviously, I don't watch baseball. I would know what that symbol was, but anyway, but Pat is not here wearing his Reds hat. He's actually here wearing his tabletop RPG history hat. So tell me a little bit about your qualifications in that arena.
Oh boy, qualifications. There's the military voice coming
That's right.
out. Why don't you tell me why you're qualified to have this conversation, young man?
Right.
No, I began my professional career out of college as a stand-up comedian and did the road for a while, moved to Los Angeles and started work as an actor. And I did maybe a half a dozen commercials and episode of Seinfeld and My Name is Earl and some other stuff. Most people remember me from Mad TV. I was on there for 3 years. And then I got into writing and directing more, and I've been a D&D gamer since '79. I started with the Holmes box set and was absolutely captivated, smitten with it at the age of 11. And it's been a big part of my creative, I remember the first time I sat down and started writing scripts, and the book that I wrote, I remember thinking, this is writing dungeons. That's all this is. Everything is dungeon mastering creatively, I feel like.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Acting is role playing.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people, actors who really either played D&D first, or after becoming actors, found D&D
Right.
for other actors and enjoy it. And they're like, wow, this is great, because it really it's that the thing they love doing. So
the tools are all the same. It's amazing. Yeah, I remember there was a chess prodigy who later went on to compete in martial arts, Josh Waitzkin. He's the guy that Searching for Bobby Fischer was made about, and he became a world champion in combat Tai Chi. And when he was learning Tai Chi, he's like, wait, this is just chess. It's like everything was exactly the same. And I feel like that's true of role-playing games. All those creative tools are the same. So I have a real debt of gratitude to your dad and the game and all the inspiration that it provided, over all those years. And I'm the writer and director of The Dreams in Gary's Basement, which you obviously know of. It's a documentary about your dad and his journey. He really lived a hero's journey in the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. Going from being basically a broke cobbler working out of his basement with 5 kids and dogs and cats and on public assistance to having a mountaintop compound in the Beverly Hills and living the dream, living the Hollywood dream. And so it's a compelling story, both about your dad and about a creation of this thing that is a cultural phenomenon to this day. I mean, all of these years later, it's stronger than ever. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were talking about earlier with the kind of the importance of the history of the game. It just adds a richness, I think, to our experience with it, to know where it came from, and to, when you see terminology in the game, to know sort of the roots, of all of these principles of play, basically. I know that coming to GaryCon and seeing all of the sort of building blocks that eventually became D&D has really contributed a lot to my enjoyment of the game. And I think too, as people continue to add to the game and create new rules and settings and concepts, it's just as helpful for them to understand the history as it is for any writer to go back and read Ernest Hemingway and Herman Melville and or all of the greats. It's like you learn from what came before you. So
yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of a couple of things. It's like Dungeons and Dragons came out of the 70s and was influenced by a lot of things prior to that, which I'd like to touch on. But
Sure.
We mentioned GaryCon, and I forgot to say, badges for GaryCon 14 went on sale today. So if you haven't gotten yourself a badge for GaryCon, make sure that you go to play.garycon.com and get a badge before they're all gone. It's our first year that we're back doing a physical convention. Fingers crossed, everything goes well. We'll be back in Lake Geneva, March 24th to 27th, 2022. We'd love for you to join us there and get to meet some of the people that we'll be talking about, which is a nice segue to, not only was it my father and Dave Arneson, which are credited for creating this Dungeons and Dragons game, which was titled Rules for Fantastic Medieval War Games, Campaigns Playable with Paper and Pencil and Miniature Figures. Very smooth title there, right? That's like a nice, rolls right off the tongue.
Concise little log line.
Yeah, it's a little long for the tagline. Role-playing game, right? That didn't exist. But leading up to that, there were some other folks who were really seminal to laying some foundation here that germinated that seed and that sprouted as Dungeons and Dragons. And where did it all begin?
Well, just to back up a step further and take it deep into the nerdy weeds, there's a Hungarian American psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is a mouthful right there. You should see the spelling; it's ridiculous. But he is perhaps the world's preeminent expert on creativity, and he wrote his most famous book is called Flow. It's about getting into the zone and the creative process of flow, and he sort of breaks down what the components are to world-changing creativity. And he says it's never the result of one person; it's the result of a complex system. And that's exactly what the wargaming community was in the 1960s. It was this complex system. It was a domain and a group of people that had a particular interest, and they had their own language and terminology and motivations and all the things that constitute the components of a particular domain, just the way that astrological physicists and any other domain. Games was a domain of expertise. And it was populated in the late 1960s by a small but passionate group of people that formed themselves into clubs, and they communicated by way of fanzines, and they gathered at conventions. And that's how ideas were exchanged. And if you think about like Leonardo da Vinci and the people who gathered in the salons of Florence, where all of the great ideas of the Renaissance were formed, it's the same type of thing. You've got people, off in the Twin Cities, Dave Arneson and his band of merry gamers. And then, there were people in New England and Chicago and Lake Geneva, Pennsylvania, and in the UK too. It was worldwide, really. But when they developed their own ideas and then exchanged ideas by way of fanzines and gathering at conventions, etc. And I have a couple of fanzines here just to give people an idea. You know, this is the Avalon Hill General. You know, this is kind of one of the more professionally kind of produced magazines that was wargaming related. But there's one from the UK called Wargamers Newsletter. And then they sort of, there are others that are kind of less professionally produced. This is from the New England Wargamers Association. It's called The Courier. It's like one of those little pamphlet style deals. And here's one kind of the bottom of the food chain in terms of production value. This is Panzerfaust, and I don't know if you can see there. It's mimeographed, you know. So that's how things were, you know. And it's got these, you know, gnarly kind of crooked staples on it. This is how ideas were exchanged back then. But if you read something like Panzerfaust, you see brilliant breakdowns of, you know, creating variations on a historical battle and variations on rules and, you know, how to properly simulate the statistics of hit probability. I mean, these are brilliant people, and a lot of them, you know, at the time anyway, dozens in a group was a lot of people. And so your dad was one of those people that was extremely involved in the fanzines. He wrote, you know, like almost obsessively. You're seeing things, numerous subjects that he covers in great depth and detail. And then the conventions they gathered at were how then they could cross-pollinate all these ideas. You could see a table laid out, you know, with a miniatures battle and how the rules are played and have them taught to you in person and that kind of thing. And clubs, I guess, are another big aspect of it that I should mention. There was the International Federation of Wargaming that was more or less Chicago-based, but it was technically international, I think, because there might have been a Canadian member or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. There was a guy from Canada, and they could call it international.
Right. And there was the MMSA, the Midwest Military Simulation Association, I believe it was. That was the Twin Cities group. The New England Wargamers Association in New England, and your dad was involved not only with the conventions and the fanzines, but he was heavily involved with the IFW. He was the vice president. And, you know, there are other brilliant minds in there. Len Lakofka was highly involved, Bill Hoyer, John Bobeck. You know, these are just really smart, really creative people. And again, all sharing ideas, you know, by way of playing with their own clubs and then writing in the fanzines.
And so how big were, you know, how many gamers were there? Like, you know, 10 million, 5 million?
I'm trying to remember. John Peterson actually had some numbers in an interview, and the difference between, you know, there's at least an order of magnitude between the number of, say, sets of Gettysburg that would sell, you know, the Avalon Hill game, and Monopoly, you know. So you're talking about a tiny fraction of the overall games market. And then, of course, it might drop another order of magnitude from there when you're talking about miniatures games with lead Napoleonic hand-painted miniatures. You know, so
I think that was numbered in maybe the thousands, like the single thousands that would play miniatures war games. Whereas today we have millions and millions of D&D players. So it was a very niche hobby.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very humble.
Yeah.
And to see the massive growth that it's had to where it is today is incredible. But where conventions are concerned, your dad was the I don't know if you want to call it the founder. He was the person really behind Gen Con. And there had been an IFW gaming convention or IFW affiliated in Pennsylvania the year before. There was kind of a dud. They tried to do some kind of deal where you had to buy the dinner. You had to buy a dinner, like, in order to play, and no one was really interested in the dinner. I mean, if you imagine a buffet set up like in like a wedding reception, and gamers, like, the whole thing was a bad idea. But your dad sort of flipped that and said, okay, we'll make the money selling hot dogs and soda and potato chips, and that ended up being a massive success. But
and that's still a winning winning combination, right? Gamers love to sit around and have their fast food at the table and play games. So
right, yeah, and you know that firsthand, trying to get people to buy dinner at the at Gary Cod from the hotel. It's like, you know, they'll eat a lot of junk food, but to eat like a plate of dinner is. But anyway, in August of 1968 is when the first Gen Con took place, and there were about 100 participants, which was so many that Tim Kask said that he thought he was going to cry. That, you know, seeing that many people there to celebrate and play these games that you think it's just you and a couple of your friends. You think you're alone kind of in the hobby, but there were these 100 people. And there was a game that was played there called the Siege of Bodenburg. It was especially seminal in the history of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, this was a miniatures game that was for medieval warfare, and it used these 40 millimeter elastilin miniatures. Elastilin is basically a kind of plastic. And these were, so at 40 millimeter, larger than the little lead figures that you're maybe used to seeing, and very colorful, you know, hand painted, a lot of primary colors. And even more than that, they had action poses, you know, so like your average Napoleonic miniature is marching with a rifle or whatever in formation. These guys are like in action poses, swinging their swords, you know, riding a galloping horse and all this stuff. And there was a gentleman who had driven from Oregon to set this game up, and there was a castle and these hundreds of these, you know, fantastic full color miniatures. And the way John Peterson described it is, you know, when we play a computer game, the graphics are all on the screen, you know, all of the color and the action and the characters. But before that, this was basically the graphics of games at the time. So this is how games were visually portrayed. And it was spectacular to look at, to the point where your dad was infatuated with it. And from what Len Lakofka said, on Sunday, when the sweeping up was going on in the convention hall there, your dad was still, that was the game that your dad and his friends were still playing, was Siege of Bodenburg. So suddenly he becomes fascinated with the medieval period based on this extraordinary display of this game. And he formed the Castellan Crusade Society, which was sort of a subchapter of the IFW that was for the purpose of developing medieval rules and playing medieval oriented games. Now, your dad had been in Dave Arneson's Grand Napoleonic campaign. Now that was an epic thing that was kind of a combination of diplomacy, you know, the game that is basically a world map where each person plays the leader of a country, and Napoleonic miniatures warfare. So people would give their orders to the referee, and, you know, to say where their troops were marching, etc. And when two troops, like two forces, came into contact, then they would break it all out on the table and play a miniatures battle. So in some ways it was just a way to develop good and meaningful tabletop miniatures battles. But it was epic insofar as there were a lot of players, and they all had territories they were defending, and people became very involved with the ongoing nature of it. And your dad wanted to do something similar with the medieval era, where you know, people would have a fiefdom and troops that they would defend and play this game diplomatically with royal edicts and whatnot. And Dave Arneson was one of the people who joined the Castellan Crusade Society. So your dad was part of his game, and now Dave is part of your dad's game. And I don't know if you want, we could, I feel like I'm rambling here a little bit.
Well, that's all right. It's really very interesting stuff. And it's just a small community, right? And Dave Arneson's up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and
right.
My dad's in Lake Geneva, you know, so a decent ways away. Long distance phone calls were a thing back then. You didn't just make long distance phone calls. You had to pay money to make a phone call. There was no internet, so people were writing stuff in letters. So, and that's why they were sending these fanzines. You couldn't just go to a blog or pull it up on your phone. So just for people who weren't around in the 70s, that's right. Kind of where you're at. So getting together and seeing each other, these conventions were super important. And that's why Gen Con was like this spawning ground for wonderful ideas. And so my dad saw the Siege of Bodenburg, is what I understand. And then, you know, I think that's what helped generate Chainmail, right?
That's correct, yeah.
The Chainmail game that he wrote with Jeff Perrin, who still comes to GaryCon. And what was really cool about Chainmail is it included man-to-man combat rules. So typically in Napoleonics, each miniature figurine represented 5 or 10 or multiple troops. You could go all the way down to one-to-one combat. And then there was a fantasy supplement that was in chainmail that was revolutionary, where you had heroes and halflings and sprites and all that sort of stuff. You probably can't see it there.
Yeah.
All right,
Right, yeah.
the fantasy supplement.
So it introduced these Tolkien-esque kind of elements that allowed you to play out, combine not just historical knights, but then with magic and magical creatures and all that extraordinary stuff.
Yeah, and so that was going on, but the very kind of, I think, important. So that's very important. Chainmail, the fantasy supplement, by primarily my father. That was what he was doing. But then in Minnesota, there was this other thing going on with Dave Arneson and, well, with really Dave Wesley first, right? Dave Wesley, and then there was Dave Arneson and Dave McGarry both involved. So it's kind of the three Daves, as I refer to them as in Minnesota.
Yeah. And just to talk about Dave Wesley a little bit, another extraordinary personality that came out of the MMSA in the Twin Cities. And he, has a major in physics, and he's a military person. So he understands both game theory and actual military tactics. And he was in the process of, searching for new information on games at the library. Was it in Minnesota, or was where he was in school in Kansas? So I believe it was in Minnesota. But he found this old 19th century treatise called Strategos, that was effectively an evolution of an 18th century war game. And it had the concept of a referee, where instead of two people just playing each other and arguing over the rules of, my gun doesn't shoot that far or whatever, there's a referee who's a third impartial party who can basically allow you to do things that are outside of what is in the strictly written rules. And so if you want to, distract your opponent by setting a barn on fire and then taking your troops in the other direction, that's obviously not going to be contemplated in the rules, but a referee then can sort of figure out how that would play out. So see, the addition of the referee is the result of Dave Wesley unearthing kind of this old material from his school library.
And Dave Wesley does come to GaryCon still. He's still alive, and he comes to GaryCon. So another great person to meet and talk to about the foundation of the game.
Yeah, it's a really interesting guy, intimidatingly smart, and nice guy, unfortunately. Yes. But and he also created basically what is the modern role-playing game with his game Brownstein. They were playing heavily in the Napoleonic era at that time, and he wanted to create a game that incorporated the game theory idea of winning is not always just about wiping out the other guy's troops. If you have an objective and someone on the other side of the table has an objective, there might be a way you can figure out to both win. And so he created this fictional town of Brownstein, and there were a number of personalities that inhabited it. And he gave each player a person that they played, that they represented in this game. And so the way that Mike Carr described it, you had to immediately sort of orient yourself, figure out where you were on the map, who was near you, what resources you had, what resources you needed from other players. And it was an extremely immersive and compelling experience that the players just wanted more of. They were very excited about it. And then Dave Arneson, of course, seizes upon this, sort of combines this idea with the medieval world that your dad had created with the Castle and Crusade Society, and created a game he called Blackmore, which is role-playing in this medieval world with fantastical creatures in it as well.
And I think the credits that Dave Arneson gets are the idea of underground exploration being the kind of the primary means. You're in these catacombs or a dungeon, right, beneath. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. And the idea of which I think existed, but maybe progressing an ability to progress your units. Now in Chainmail, you have heroes and superheroes who need who take more hits to be killed, right? So the idea of being tougher or having more hit points, what would become hit points, was there. But I think the idea of gaining experience through some sort of action, through an experience that carried over into subsequent games, was newer and might have come out of Blackmore. So certainly Dave Wesley, with the whole idea of a referee and various win conditions, and not only just being martial. Dave Arneson with bringing it underground and the experience. And then I think it was after a Gen Con, somehow my dad heard about Blackmore. And I was very young. I think it was 72, maybe 73. So I was 2 years old. And Dave and it might have been McGarry.
That's right. Yeah.
It came over, and I think they played with my dad, and I think it was primarily my dad, maybe a couple other adult gamers. And once he played Blackmore, it's like a light bulb went off, and I think that just got him going. And fast forward a year, and he wrote. He took chainmail and ideas from Blackmore and mixed everything together. All this, like you said, this. In this group that they were in, there was a free flow of ideas, right? It wasn't like you were stealing someone's idea. They all shared their work openly. And he came up with the D&D rules, which created new stuff, but also used some of the foundation, right? Some of the rules, some of the things that were created, and made it into something that could be communicated to others in a written format. Because everyone else's stuff pretty much existed in their brain, and you would have to teach someone how to do it. So he made that big leap.
That's just to back up a quick second. Yeah, that at the time, I think your dad was the rules editor for Gygax Games and was looking for a new edition of Chainmail, and was actually having this conversation with Dave about it being a possible new edition or new material they could put into Chainmail. And obviously, it became its own thing, which was, much more compelling than Chainmail on its own. Yeah. And Gygax Games, I think, comes into play here because your dad thought of this as something they could bring to Don Lowry, the guy who ran Gygax Games. And Gygax Games, unfortunately, was a very small company and not in very good shape at the time, so they had to turn down Dungeons and Dragons when your dad and Dave had gotten a typed manuscript together.
Yeah.
So that. Oh, go ahead.
And I was gonna say this what my dad saw in Dungeons and Dragons and how revolutionary and how awesome it was not a widely held belief. He took it to Avalon Hill, and they basically laughed at him and said, "People don't want to make believe; they want to play military, historic games." And then Don Lowry was also not able to finance it. It was seen as a risky venture. And so my dad, just to give people an idea, my dad was a shoemaker at that point in time. He'd been fired from his job as an insurance underwriter and was at home with 5 kids. I was the youngest of 5. And we were on food stamps. My mom would garden to help feed us. We wore hand-me-down clothes. We didn't have a car because we couldn't afford one. So very, very poor, definitely in the lower class strata, financially, socioeconomic class. But he believed in this enough that his best friend, Don Kay, borrowed a couple $1,000s, and they poured in this, life savings into starting Tactical Studies Rules to publish Dungeons and Dragons. And so that was quite an undertaking. He literally gambled everything he had, things he didn't have. He borrowed money to bring this to life. And I think that without that, we might not have seen Dungeons and Dragons, and it might have been, maybe would have seen a role-playing game at some point in time that was different or whatever, but we wouldn't have seen Dungeons and Dragons without that passion, without that belief, without him collating everything together. So I think that is the big thing that my father did. Starting Gen Con is Dungeons and Dragons, and the Dragon magazine later was important.
Just quickly, I mentioned that psychologist Csikszentmihalyi talks about creativity. He talks about the importance of the complex system, and which in this case is the wargaming community, but also the importance of that person who kind of steps out and not only identifies something that is interesting, but finds a novel way to combine ideas and then elaborate them, which is what you're describing in the writing of the rules. There's a lot of grind work that is entailed there that takes a lot of intelligence and intuition. And your dad had the leadership ability then to, get Don Kay, his partner, on board, to create this company. And once the company was formed, to attract people to it that are talented and motivated and inspired. And so there's a broad variety of skills that your dad had to have in order to make this happen, in order for it to become a cultural shift, as opposed to just a footnote in gaming history.
And yes, I mean, in the role-playing game that Dungeons and Dragons created, the role-playing game genre. Obviously, we all role-played. We all played, cops and robbers, whatever the case may be, as kids, right? We see that throughout history. But the idea of the role-playing game genre is a new type of game. That was revolutionary. And I think a lot of viewers may just take that for granted, that it's always existed. Well, it didn't. And it really turned things on its head. And people were like blown away by this idea that you didn't have, it wasn't adversarial. There wasn't a winner or a winning team and a losing team. It was cooperative. Everyone played a person, a hero, a character in a story, and you would succeed or fail generally together. And the one person who'd be kind of the storyteller, the referee, that whole idea of Braunstein, and becoming eventually known as the dungeon master, right? But they were just referees back then. Who would kind of play all the other parts and would provide all the other roles for the people to interact with. The fact that there wasn't a confines, it was boundless. It was open as far as your imagination would take you. That was your limits. Unlike a Monopoly board where you could only go around in a certain prescribed pattern and it was all laid out for you and you go around and around again, right? The idea of being able to continue from session to session and to continue this story, to continue this adventure, to develop your characters. In Monopoly, once you set it up and you finish the game, you put it away and you get it out again, you have to go start over. It's not like the shoe gets to move an extra space every turn because it doesn't work that way.
A level 2 shoe.
It's right, yeah, level 2. The idea of levels, armor class, hit points, the strength, intelligence, dexterity, constitution. If you look at role-playing video games, it's influenced that. If you look at Dungeons and Dragons, it influenced books, TV, actors, directors. We could talk about this. A whole panel could talk about this for hours, but we are out of time.
Right.
We do need to take a little break. We're going to be talking to some more people. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to Tim Cass just a little bit, who was the first paid employee at TSR anyway, and the editor of Dragon Magazine. So we'll chat with him briefly on tomorrow morning. But coming up right after a short break, we're going to talk to the woman at TSR, none other than my mom, Mary Gygax Walker, who was married to my father for 25 years and had she's my mom, right? So she had 5 children with my father, and was there through thick and thin all the way into the 80s, and certainly during this time. And she has a perspective that's not often heard from. So really looking forward to talking to my mom and having Pat and I talk to her. But first, I just want to take a short break here with a little word from Extra Life, the charity that we're supporting.
Have you ever heard of Extra Life?
Extra Life.
What is Extra Life?
I'll explain it to you real quick.
Extra Life le da la oportunidad a la comunidad gamer de hacer la diferencia recaudando dinero para ayudar a los niños y niñas de Estados Unidos, Canadá y Puerto Rico.
Extra Life is a way for us as a gaming community to give back to our real life communities by raising money for our local Children's Miracle Network hospitals.
Children's Miracle Network Hospitals,
which is a network of hospitals where every kid that goes there is treated regardless of their financial situation.
El 100% de ese dinero se queda local en tu hospital o fundación a la que tú representes.
100% of the proceeds go to your local Children's Miracle Network hospital, and what's doper than that?
The funds go 100% to those hospitals. They help kids who are sick get treatments, pay for training for their doctors.
Whether it's a broken bone or cancer, no child is turned away.
All you have to do is sign up over at extra-life.org.
Extra-life.org.
Extra-life.org. Sign up.
Join a team, join a guild, or participate solo. Then pick which local Children's Miracle Network hospital you'd like to play for. After that, all you have to do is get friends and family, coworkers, that awesome neighbor down the street to donate to your Extra Life fundraising goal. Heck, you can even convince them to join your team and play along with you to be a hero in real life.
Sign up for Extra Life and become a hero just like me.
Play games and heal kids.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Founders and Legends 4. I'm your host, Luke Gygax, and as promised, I'm here with Pat Kilbane and none other than my mom, the woman at TSR. Hi, Mom.
Hello.
And I just want to go ahead and pass the baton over to Pat and go ahead and talk about some interesting questions that we have for, and I'll chime in if there's anything that needs chiming in on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, again, it's a great pleasure to be talking to you, Mary, and it's exciting for people who are interested in Dungeons and Dragons history, because you, more so than anybody, really had ringside seats to this entire roller coaster ride. From the very beginning to the greatest heights. And I guess the first question that I had was, what do you remember your family situation being? Like, what was the household for you guys in around 1973 when Gary was first starting to work on Dungeons and Dragons? Do you remember?
Well, there was 5 children and no real income. He was at that time, I do believe he had started repairing shoes. His mother had purchased the shoe repair equipment for him when this one man died and went out of the business. And so he had a few weeks of instruction from the man's son, and it was put up in the basement of the house that we rented at 330 Center Street in Lake Geneva. And he, that was something. I mean, people would come to the front door and they would, bring their shoes that needed fixing, and I would answer the door and give them a ticket, and then Gary would proceed to repair the shoes. And one time, there was a limit on how long something could stay without, if you left your shoes for so long, I think it was like 2 months or 3 months, then that was that, So one time, we were really poor, as I would like to say. We were on food stamps and everything else. And so I went to the door and answered it, and this lady came, and I took the ticket down to Gary, and he said, "Those are long gone." He says, "As a matter of fact, you're wearing them."
Oh, jeez.
I was wearing these clogs, and her brown suede clogs, and I really liked them. They fit me just perfectly. And I felt so sorry for the lady, and she never noticed what I said. "I'm sorry."
That's hilarious. So you're suddenly trying to hide your feet as you're shooing this woman out the door.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and Luke talked about how so even the grown-ups in the house had hand-me-downs of sorts. Luke was talking about how the kids, the clothes got passed down from one kid to the next, and sometimes Luke got the girls' clothes, he said.
Oh, well, he went. Ernie was a different size than Luke, and there was 11 years between them. So he didn't. We didn't. None of us looked too stylish. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and how was it as far as did it cause tension at all? The fact that you were sort of living on the edge that way financially?
Not. Yes and no. I mean, I think actually we were closer as a family at that time because he was there all the time, and then of course the gamers were there a lot too, But they couldn't be there when he was doing the shoe repair. I think that he had to take his sand table out of the basement in order to get the shoe repair equipment in there. He had to dismantle the sand table where they all used to play with the miniatures down there.
Yeah, Len Lakofka said he was there that day when it got dismantled in the middle of a game, and everyone was crestfallen that it had to go, and it went to Don Kay's garage, is my understanding.
That's right. I didn't miss it at all because they were very noisy down there.
Yeah, that was. I was wondering that too. What your feeling was about the gaming? Whether it was. It sounds like it was a little disruptive at times in the household, huh?
Yeah, well, they were mostly really nice guys, but the thing was, sometimes I just kind of resented the fact that he was always playing games and not doing anything with the family. Well, then later on, of course, the boys got very involved with it and everything. But no, yeah, I used to. Sometimes I got really upset with the gamers because some of them were, they weren't always real polite and nice, but some of them were very polite and nice. So.
Right.
A lot of times before he got fired from the job and before Luke was born, then the gamers would come home from Chicago or wherever and on the train with him and spend the whole weekend sleeping on our couch and eating at our table and play. And he didn't pay any attention to any of us. Now that I didn't like, but
Right.
other than that, no, it was okay. It was all right.
So I've heard people say that Mom, you're partially responsible for Gen Con starting because the year prior there was 10 or 12 people who were jammed into our tiny little place at 330 Center Street, and they disturbed us kids so much. I wasn't born yet, but they disturbed the other kids so much.
Yeah, it was Cindy.
It.
Yeah, they kept waking Cindy up, and she was just a few months old.
Oh gosh.
I was very angry, and I told Gary I was going to parade down there in my nightgown if they didn't keep him quiet. So he quieted him down.
And so he had no choice but to go find a place to have like an actual convention, and that's how Gen Con was formed.
Although we still had some, but it wasn't like a crowd. It wasn't like 12 of them because we couldn't keep those 12 quiet. But there would always be somebody on a couch or something.
Yeah, it's funny you're talking about this. It reminds me of there's a book I was reading about creative geniuses and how creative genius typically has to be in a stable relationship because otherwise there's too much chaos in their life for them to focus on their creativity. And so the fact that you were able to hold down the fort amidst all of that chaos, all the kids and gamers and animals and all of that stuff, is an extraordinary feat, and the entire gaming community owes you a tremendous debt of gratitude, I should say. So
keeping the children while he was writing, he would stay up until like midnight and write. This is when he wasn't doing the shoe repair. He was doing nothing. He was just on unemployment, and I had to keep them quiet until noon. And,
oh wow!
Yes, but they were really good. I have to say, the more I see children nowadays and everything, the more I tell my grown children, you are such wonderful kids that I never even realized how good you were.
Right. Yeah. These kids today that are trained by the internet have kind of a different set of rules, I suppose. But I guess we'll fast forward then to around 1975 when it became a real business, when TSR incorporated and opened up offices at 723 William Street. And you became an employee then of TSR. Do you recall those days?
Oh, sure. Well, I wasn't going to go anywhere until everybody was in school. And, when Luke toddled off to kindergarten, then, I was crying. And I was really, I didn't mind. I would like to have something to do. So the Mr. Bloom was the one that, bought the building and loaned money and everything, and then he inserted his two sons in positions there as partners, right? Because Brian in the beginning had started off with an investment of $4,000, and then Brian Bloom, and then he bought Donna Kay out for that, and then when Mr. Bloom, when they wanted to expand, Mr. Bloom had a lot of money, and so he gave the loan, and then his sons Brian and Kevin were put in there as partners. And that's how that 723. And then Gary, he needed somebody to edit and type and be his secretary. And well, I had gotten a D in typing in high school because I really coordinated, but I got A+ in shorthand because I could memorize the stuff. And so I did shorthand and then typing at my own speed, it wasn't so bad. And then if I made one mistake, and had any whiteout, he'd hold it up to the window and say, "You've got to do it over."
Oh
And I
no.
had, and then we got a letter back from Playboy, something from the Playboy, and there were like 6 whiteouts on there. And so I said, "That's that. I'm I'm not going to
Yeah,
do it over anymore." But
that's
then,
right. They had a budget over at Playboy, and if they've got whiteout, then you can have whiteout, right?
That's right.
so anyway, then I started editing the things and typing the things, and I got to where I could type quite well at my own speed, without being in a class full of other people, and the girl next to me going 60,000 miles an hour, and so
And
anyway, it worked out really well, and I was able to help out over there. He would get picked up, and somebody would drive him over, and then I would do some things around the house, and then I would walk over, and
oh wow.
it was a nice, I liked it, and it was good. I could work my own hours and be there when the children got home from school.
Wow. Yeah, it was very close. It's right around the block, basically, wasn't it?
No, actually, it was like 5 blocks.
Oh gosh, I'm misremembering.
That's all right. It's just a good stretch of the legs.
Right.
Yeah, not
I
too
like
bad.
walking.
Yeah, mom really, you always loved walking. But I think one thing I posted up on my social media sites, a picture of you, and then the card that you had that said the woman at TSR with the little drawings on it and stuff, and that got the most likes out of anything I've ever posted on Instagram. Was that
That was a
card,
wonderful
your picture.
card.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, I think that's kind of a neat story.
Oh, okay. Well, none of it was my idea. That was all Dave Sutherland. He did the whole thing, and I didn't have any input on that at all. He just said, "I'll make you a card," and I thought it would just be, a card that said Mary Gygax, advertising or whatever. And he made that whole thing up. It was all his doing, and he wouldn't even take anything for it. He wouldn't let me pay him.
It was a great card. That's
Yeah, I
very
love it. I
cool.
love it.
And was that, I mean, after, I'm sure you must have had your doubts or questions at least in the early days of the venture. And around, in 1975, the game is selling well, and there are employees over there, and there's an office. And I mean, was that exciting seeing that come to fruition?
Oh, yes. Yes, it was. Of
Yeah,
course it was.
yeah, I can only imagine, that, and which brings us kind of to the next subject of conversation, when things really, really took off in 1979 with all the publicity that D&D got, in part as a result of the James Dallas Egbert case, where he went missing from Michigan State and was subsequently
Right.
found.
That's where we got all the publicity.
Right, and sales then were huge. That you go into hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, and then even tens of millions a little later on. But what did that feel like? I mean, now this is getting to be like fairy tale,
Well, yes, it did. In a lot of ways, it was very difficult to handle, but sometimes I felt, kind of, well, we had friends that were, nice to us and invited us to their parties and all. But after Gary got to be more successful by far than they were, then they really didn't they didn't invite us anymore. And it was,
Wow.
yeah, and there was a
Wow.
little jealousy there. But then one thing I did really enjoy, and that was these battle axes at the National Food Store that always gave me such a hard time when I check out with food stamps and things, and they were always so nasty to me. Well, then when everything was going well, all of a sudden they asked me, both of them were right there, and they said, "Oh, Mrs. Gygax, could you please get our daughters a job at your place?"
Wow.
And
No
I said,
shame.
I said, "I'll see what I can do,"
Perfect.
but I didn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, wow.
I
How
didn't
soon
do it. And then Donna Kay was checking out one day behind me there, and this was after it was very successful, and she said, "Mary, I wish I'd listened to you." She said, "I wish, you told me to stay in it,
Oh,
because I did. I
interesting.
tried to talk her. I said, it's going to go somewhere. It's going to be something. Just hang on a little while."
Wow. So
But
you
she sold
believed.
out for just $4,000.
Yeah, and
Wow.
that's because Donna Kay was married to Don Kay, who was my dad's very, very close friend from childhood, and who had started TSR with him. Then he died. What year did he die, Mom? He died of a heart attack at a very young age, right?
It was
Yes,
70,
yes, he was only
75.
he was only 35, and he had a heart attack, but he was working 2 jobs, and he wasn't getting any sleep, and he wasn't getting along with Donna. They were fighting all the time, and he was under just a lot of stress.
He was a smoker too, as well, from what I
Oh
understand.
yes, yes he
Yeah.
was, and Gary too. Gary, 3 packs of Camels a day.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Not
that
a good
moment
habit.
you were talking about in the grocery store reminds me of, I mean, that's the scene in Pretty Woman where Julia Roberts, she had gone into this chic clothing boutique and
Oh,
got disrespected, and then she comes into a lot of money and then goes in there later and they get their comeuppance. And yeah, and there was
Yeah, it's really fun. It's really fun. Oh, by the way, Gary's mother bought his cigarettes for him, and he would do odd
Wow.
jobs for her then to get, she would come over to our house for dinner every night, and she would, because her husband had died, and she would bring a vegetable or the dessert in, and she would eat dinner with us. And then she bought a dishwasher for us because when Luke was born, I picked up a staph infection on my hands and at the hospital, and Luke picked it up on he had it on his feet.
Oh,
So I
gosh.
couldn't do the dishes anymore till that healed, and the kids were doing the dishes, and my mother-in-law hated to do dishes, so she didn't want to help. So she bought him a dishwasher. So we had that, that was nice. And she also bought us a color TV. So we didn't really suffer too badly as long as we had Gary's mother just down the street.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's you. So you weren't in it all alone. You guys had some
No,
help.
she was very, very helpful in many, many ways.
Yeah. Oh, that's so neat to hear. And yeah, it's neat to hear too. You mentioned that when you were talking to Donna Kay, you were telling her that she should stay in it, and so it's interesting to me that you believed so much in the game when you weren't a gamer per se. So you wouldn't have understood
Oh
it.
no, I did see that it was selling, because when he wrote it and he told me about it, I said, "Oh, this will sell," and I was thinking, $500 a year royalties like he was getting from Avalon Hill for Alexander.
Oh,
And I
right.
thought this will sell because he had written he was writing when before when he was on unemployment and I was keeping the kids quiet. He was writing stories and sending them around, and it took money for us to get. You had to have the money to have it round trip, so they'd send it back. They never even looked at it. I know they didn't, because he had no name, nobody. I don't think they ever looked at his manuscripts. So then, when he wrote that, I said, "Oh, I think this will sell."
Right.
But I never,
Nice.
of course, I never had any idea.
Yeah, there was an old manuscript I saw in the 80s, in the early 80s that Dad had. It was just typewritten pages, and it was called The Hornbow. And I asked Dad to read it, and he said, "No, that's the first novel I ever wrote. It's garbage." I have no idea where it is. I have no idea.
Oh, I was going to say that would be a real collector's item to have.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's buried somewhere in some papers. I hope so. I would love to be able to read that. But he forbid me.
I know. I didn't have it in any of my files up at the house, so that wasn't. I didn't have anything that he wrote up there.
Yeah, it was typewritten pages, and this was in Stone Manor in like 1983 or 4 or something like that I saw it. So, unfortunately, we're a little pressed for time. I think that's all the time we have to talk to you, Mom. But I tell you what, I think if you had fun and you'd be willing to come back, maybe we can have another session and maybe Pat, I think you were having a good time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, please! It was easy peasy. How could I not enjoy it? It was just like sitting around and talking to friends.
It is.
Oh,
it
great.
is. That's why I love doing this sort of stuff. So thank you very much, Mom. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with Pat and I on Founders and Legends, giving people a little insight from your perspective on what it was like during the origins of the game and kind of the rise of D&D and being a member of the Gygax family and some of the hardships and some of the uncertainties that were faced by Dad and certainly you being there to support him through there. And I think it was very important as a grown-up person now and married for a lot of years. I understand how with children how hard that is and how central it was. So really thank you, Mom, for being a good mom and supporting Dad.
Oh, Luke, I think also you got to thank the dog, Harold, because the shoe repair was going nowhere because the dog became very protective of you, and you would sit in that chair, and I put the man's shoes. I came with the man's shoes and put them on by the chair, and I went to get the change, and he went to get his shoes, and Harold leaped through the air, and I just caught him. And the word got around that the dog was vicious, and that so the business dropped off. So that put a little pressure on us.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. So Harold was very protective. He was a good dog. I loved that dog. He was a good
He
boy.
wouldn't let Gary spank. He tried to spank Luke, and the dog leaped up and knocked Gary over backwards.
See? Told you he was a good dog.
Hilarious.
Okay, guys.
All right,
It
Mom.
was very.
Thank
bye-bye.
you so much, Mary.
Yep. So here.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. All right. Up next, we have a very exciting game. Game 1 with Satine Phoenix. She's going to be doing Midsummer Mystery. So stay tuned for Satine Phoenix. Thanks, everybody.
Changing kids' health through children's hospitals isn't just about helping those in critical situations. It's also about the research, preventative care, health and safety education, and other support services that help build healthier communities today and tomorrow. You can help change kids' health and change the future for all of us. Register at extra-life.org.
Since 2015, Level Up Dice has been innovating the dice industry. We brought you raised obsidian and multicolored anodizations. We worked tirelessly to bring glyphic designs and layered stone dice to market. We engineered bringing cage dice and ionized stone to you. Through it all, Level Up Dice has been there at the forefront of innovation. We're also nerds and geeks, gamers, friends, and family. Over this past year, we've been hard at work bringing you new products, new designs, and creating a safe space for you to visit at conventions. And we cannot wait to see you again.
Located in the heart of Los Angeles, one of the most culturally diverse cities in the U.S., Children's Hospital Los Angeles welcomes children and families from all over the world. With over 350 pediatric specialty programs and services, Children's Hospital Los Angeles is consistently ranked among the top programs by U.S. News and World Report. Our physicians include nationally and internationally renowned experts in their fields, working alongside our care teams, all with a single mission: to do everything we can to create hope and build a healthier future for your child. Home to the Saban Research Institute at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, the finest minds in the world come together to drive discoveries and find leading-edge cures for children everywhere. Here, your child comes first. Every aspect of our hospital is designed with patients and families in mind, from X-ray machines that use less radiation to play spaces that let your child be a child. We understand your child's health condition might lead you to seek the best care outside your own country. That's why Children's Hospital Los Angeles' Center for Global Health is here to help. We are your home away from home. The Center for Global Health offers international families one point of contact to facilitate seamless, culturally sensitive care for hundreds of children from more than 75 countries. It's a place of hope, healing, and compassion. Children's Hospital Los Angeles, creating hope and building healthier futures around the world.
Hello, I'm Benwin Bronzebottom, celebrity dwarf and video game enthusiast, and this is my sidekick, Crowy.
Hello.
Quiet, you. I'm here to tell everyone about Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms. It's a Dungeons & Dragons based strategy game from Codename Entertainment.
It's a management game with an emphasis on formation strategy, where you assemble parties of legendary heroes and send them on adventures through the Forgotten Realms.
Heroes? Crowy, don't you mean champions?
Players unlock legendary champions of the Forgotten Realms, like Dritz Duerden and the Companions of the Hall, Farida and Havilar from the Brimstone Angels saga, and many more. Assemble the best adventuring party possible based on your formation options, champion abilities, and the obstacles and enemies you face.
Or just smash your mouse button repeatedly like I do and hope for the best.
Each champion has an incredible array of skills and items to let you customize your style and play even further.
Farther. Farther means more distant, further is figurative.
Well, I meant more distant, but figuratively.
That's further.
Well, customize your style even further, because Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms is available on all your favorite gaming platforms. Steam for PC and Mac, Web, Epic Game Store, PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Nintendo Switch, iOS tablets, and Android devices.
Well, let me know when it comes to the BlackBerry. I'm not giving up that phone. It's the only keyboard I can use.
I hear it's coming to the smart fridge next spring.
Working with Idle Champions has been so much fun because it's a different version of Archon. It's like a cartoon coloring book version of Archon, which is really, really fun. So seeing the artwork originally for little Archon in the game, the way that he walks across the screen with his shield and he breathes fire, and then even the way that Chang'o the Manticore comes down at different points. It's so much fun. I mean, you can only dream to have a character of yours then immortalized in that way and playable and unlockable in a video game. The Archon and Idle Champions currently is an earlier version of Archon, so a pre-Hand of Vecna Archon. How did Archon get the Hand of Vecna? Archon was sent out by Tiamat over the course of a decade to go and retrieve artifacts for her. So Tiamat would appear to Archon in dreams, and she would reveal to him the location of a great weapon that could help him, or a great suit of armor. Like the axe that he carries belonged to a general of Asmodeus and was buried inside of this tomb. And so Archon went on this adventure to find that axe of Asmodeus. And so Tiamat would appear to him in dreams, and she did the same to him in terms of this kind of extinction event that was potentially about to happen, where Vecna had teleported huge pieces of land from the Shadowfell and armies and animated this giant long-dead titan and was inside of this mile-high structure, juggernaut, going to destroy everything in its path. And so Archon was sent there in order to stop Vecna from destroying the realm. Archon's entire party was killed, except for him. And he wound up using his charisma to become assimilated into another group that shared the same primary objective, which was to kill Vecna and destroy Vecna and stop Vecna from taking over the prime material plane. Now, what this party didn't know was that Archon had a secondary objective, which was to find out what was allowing Vecna to teleport cities and armies from other planes and bring that back. So during that battle, Archon survived, and towards the end realized that the power was coming from Vecna's hand. So when the battle was won, one of the members of this party that Archon joined was going to die. And so in this very vulnerable moment, the friends were gathered around as he was about to pass, and Archon pulled off this move in this very vulnerable moment. He used their vulnerability against them, and in a quiet moment led them to believe that he was sent to destroy the hand. And he had the power to do so in this axe. And when he raised his hand up and whispered a prayer to Tiamat and everyone looked on, he swung the axe down, chopped his own arm off, replaced it with Vecna's hand, and teleported away. He teleported to Krull, who was waiting for him, who healed him from the battle and opened a door to Avernus, to where Archon went and then had an audience with Tiamat. Tiamat rose this giant tower of obsidian, volcanic rock out of hell, and this 9 layers tower with dragon heads around the top. Archon and Krull then sent for Torragar, and he met them there, and this army formed, this dragon army formed around Archon, who was this champion who had returned with what the dragon cult and the dragon armies believed was the actual cure for Tiamat's imprisonment, that finally someone was going to come along with the power to free her. But Archon needed time to figure out how to use the hand and how to unlock its power. And so he began this series of mental battles with Vecna, where they would meet on this ethereal plane and have these mental face-offs and these mental battles in which Archon would try to understand Vecna's secrets while Vecna would try to gain control over Archon's mind. That's how Archon got the hand, and that's what he's doing with it now, and that's what he's up to when you as the player characters run into him. He is in the middle of this process trying to free Tiamat.